We are going to be in Daniel, the 11th chapter. Daniel 11. End of Daniel, I'll give you a kind of an agenda of where I'm planning on going. I believe we're going to do the entire 11th chapter today. It's going to be very superficial because there is 300 plus years of history, detailed history given in this chapter. So to cover that in today's class, it's going to be superficial. And then we'll look at chapter 12, Lord willing, next week. And then I am going to come back to the angelic forces that we introduced last week that we saw in chapter 10. Look at a number of passages that talk about that. And then after that, we will be moving on to the book of 1 Corinthians is for study subject matter. So that is the agenda of where we are planning on going with our class here. So last week we read in chapter 10. In chapter 10, in fact, the entirety of the book of Daniel is an incredible book. The last part is phenomenal in so many different ways. Chapter 10 is really amazing to me because we get a glimpse, as I just alluded to, into the angelic forces and an allusion to the demonic forces that are behind all the physical that we see. I referenced last week, Paul in 1 Corinthians 4 mentions that the things that are seen are temporal. It's the things that are unseen that are eternal, they're going to last. And those are really the real things. We kind of reverse that. You know, we think what we can see is real and what we can't see is not real, but the opposite of that is true. So in chapter 10, what's happening is Daniel has just finished praying. He's sick, he's upset. We noted the probable reason for that is this aligns to the time where the temple is being rebuilt in Jerusalem, but it has been stopped due to obstacles and lashback against that, and the time is about the same, so it seems like Daniel is mourning over that. And during this time, right after, he goes out and he's traveling with some business associates in the kingdom, it would seem probable. There's a vision. This amazing vision starts to take place, and Daniel falls down seizing. Not the word Scripture uses, but he's trembling, he faints. I would describe it as seizing. So what all of his good friends do is quite logical. They run and hide, right? And leave Daniel all by himself. So Daniel now is seeing this vision by himself. 3 times he's touched, he's brought to his knees, he's brought to his feet, and then he's given strength. And so this angel keeps strengthening Daniel. And he gives him some insight into what's been taking place. Daniel, I'm Gabriel. I was coming to you the moment you started to pray, but I got distracted fighting other forces in Persia. But Michael came to relieve me, and so now I'm here, but I've got to go back and continue my work, right? But Daniel, you are beloved, and I'm here to give you understanding, right? So that's where we're at in this story. Questions or comments? All right, so chapter 10, verse 21. But I tell you that what is inscribed in the book of truth, there's none who contends by my side except Michael, your prince. I read this verse because I want to remind you of the context that we're here. So Gabriel says, listen, Michael's, been the one that's helped me in this endeavor. And the reason we need to read that is verse 1 of chapter 11. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Who's talking? It's not Daniel. I've mentioned this numerous times in our studies because I'm easily confused. Our chapter breaks make it very difficult at times. They can be an aid or they can be a hindrance. In this case, it's one of the main cases where they're a tremendous hindrance because this is still Gabriel talking. This is still Gabriel saying, hey, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Now, it's also relevant or useful for us to read that verse all by itself because chapter 10 dealt with these and gave us some insight into the angelic forces going on behind the scene. But a thought occurred to me as I thought about this verse today. Oftentimes we get really, really worked up over political elections and political forces, right? I remember getting engaged in politics at the age 18 because I figured out for the first time in my life that this was the most important election ever. And if it didn't go the right way, the world was going to come to an end. Right? And then 4 years later, I'm now 22, and all of a sudden there's this election that's so important that if I didn't vote right and the right outcome didn't come from this election, the world was going to end, and worse than that, it was going to be terrible. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. We are been given a civil duty and opportunity in this country that's unlike what's been known throughout history for us to have this kind of involvement in our government. So I'm not trying to tell you your vote doesn't matter. I'm just telling you your vote doesn't matter that much. Right? This is the message of Daniel, really throughout. Who's in control? God. Now think about this. The angel is standing to confirm, to strengthen who? Darius. What do you think your vote has to do against that angel? Let me ask you this. Did Darius seem like a good thing for God's people? No. And so, again, I'm not telling you, don't get too radical on me, just in response to my being radical. I'm not telling you your vote doesn't matter. I'm saying, as Christians, let's not get too wrapped up in that aspect of things. Do they have an impact? Yeah. Is that going to be the end-all, save-all? No. In fact, as Christians, the vote we want to win is the vote of the heart, right? Darius, Gabriel's standing up for Darius here, and he's strengthening him. Can you imagine what we're going to see in the next several hundred years of history is all this amazing stuff take place? And here's what I think it would have felt like to be a Jew. Man, that king comes up and he sends his wife up and then their friends and then she dies and he kills her and then this person. Oh my goodness, everything's out of control. Right? It's going to seem you like soap operas. I mean, there is drama in this chapter. And there is drama in the history that's forecasted in this chapter. It's amazing. So that's something to keep in mind. It seems out of control. I want to turn to two New Testament passages real quick. Ephesians, the first chapter, and verse 10. Because one thing you'll notice as we read through Daniel 11 is there's a lot of history given in detail. It's prophetic, and we'll address that in just a moment. But it's not the entirety of history. It's a very narrow vein of history. And a question that I think should be asked is, why that vein of history? Well, it's because we are getting to the Messiah. We're getting to the pinnacle of all time. We're getting to the point where God has an impact on the world that can't be undone, that can't be rivaled. That's the vein of history that we're traveling through, or that we're following through. So amongst all this chaos, all this trouble, and all these people and kings doing all this stuff, here's why I think it's really important. Ephesians 1, I know we're jumping in the middle of a sentence here, but verse 10, as a plan for the fullness of time to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth. Let's come back to verse 7 now and reread this. In him, being Jesus, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespass according to the riches of the grace which he lavished upon us in all wisdom and insight, making known to us the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ as a plan for the fullness of time, to unite all things in him, in heaven and in earth. So the mystery is that we're all united, can all be united in God, right? Through Jesus. Both Jew and Gentile, right? When does this take place? Verse 10? In the fullness of time. When the time was right. Here's the point that Daniel is being told, I think, to cut right through to the very heart of the issue. All this stuff's going to be taking place, Daniel, but you need to know this. I'm in control, and I'm going to bring all this craziness. I'm telling you what's going to happen, so you know that I know. And throughout all this craziness, Jesus is going to rise. And he's going to unite all things together. Heaven and earth. Right? Galatians 4:4. So you just have to turn backwards a couple pages likely. My Bible, it's one page. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law so that they might receive adoption as sons. When did Jesus come into the world? The fullness of time, when the time was right. Who made the time right? Who decided when the time was right? God. Wow. That, I think, if you get nothing else from this lesson, don't get lost in all the details, remember that. Hundreds of years are foreseen in advance, so in great detail, of what's going to take place. And the message is, I'm in control. When the time's right, I'm going to take care of things. Questions or comments on that broad idea?
Corey, the first verse we read there in Daniel, that book of truth, is that like a, do you think, is there any cross-reference on that to explain what that is? Is that a book of truth in heaven? So he's going on into chapter 11, telling us what's in, kind of like summarizing what's a part of what's in the book of truth?
Yeah, so I think we can make a mistake of trying to make everything mean something and to get too exact on these issues. He's telling Daniel, I'm going to show you the truth. What's the truth? Unaltering, books unaltering, right? The book of truth, this is how things are going to happen. Could there be a book where these things are written in advance? Yeah, but I think we're getting a little sidetracked from the message there. Amanda.
That just reminds me of it's so confusing sometimes in heavenly or spiritual things described in earthly terms.
Yes.
It's like very hard to decipher exactly. Is it meaning for us or is it meaning in a spiritual way?
Yeah. To bring a little more clarity to that with what Amanda is saying too, Corey. We read about the book of life or the book of the Lamb, right? I don't know, maybe many of you think there's a literal book in heaven with names written in it. I think we're missing the point when we go there. I can tell you, I don't think there's a book. It's spiritual concepts that we're being given physical ideas to represent. So I think it's very similar language. I've thought a lot recently as I go through this of Emily, and she gets really worked up over idle words. David, you've heard her fuss about this. And I think Emily underestimates the value of words. For instance, if I say it's raining cats and dogs, it's raining really hard, right? And I told someone called me a few months ago and was asking a question. I said, I think in the Bible we spend too much time looking for cats and dogs, right? The message is it's raining really hard. And my idea about Emily is one of the things that about idle words, if something bad happens, I say, oh crap. Is that an idle word? No. What am I saying? This is no good. Right? Did it express something? Yes. Could I express it better? I'm not going to dispute that. Probably could. But was that not? No, it had a meaning, right? It conveyed a message. And so I don't know how clear that is, but I think that's the idea of what Gabriel's getting at. Yep. And I think you could very well take the idea that there's a literal book and be within the realm of Scripture as well. Great question. Thank you. All this stuff is taking place. The concept is God's in control and he's going to bring us back. Let me come back to the criticisms of Daniel. So the criticism of Daniel is that obviously was not written in Daniel's time frame, 6 to 500 years BC, right? Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem 605 BC, and the time frame follows. Here's what's interesting. The evidence for that wasn't written then is zero. The only evidence given is primarily chapters 11 and 12. Why? Because you can't know this much information about what's going to happen before it happens. And so the criticism is it was written late 2nd century BC, 200 years before Christ, not 550 years before Christ. Well, there's this really neat problem about that as we talk about evidence. The problem's the Septuagint, one of the problems. Does anyone remember when the Septuagint was written? 260 BC. Guess what's in the Septuagint? What book? You could probably take a guess, being we're studying a particular book.
Daniel.
Wait. Daniel wasn't written until 200 BC, but it's in this interpreted, translated, so I mean to say translated version of the Hebrew Bible. 207, it's included in Septuagint. Interesting idea, right? That's miraculous. I'll stick with the miraculous revelation to Daniel about what was going to take place. Questions or comments on that? All right. I opened so many cans of worms already. We're not past the first verse. It's going to be an interesting morning. So let me give you this quick synopsis of the history. I've spent at varying levels at least 3 weeks digging into the history that these couple chapters cover, and I'm so happy Colin's here because He's going to fill me in when I get confused here. So there's a lot here, right? And again, I think through all of that, you can study it. They parallel. We've taken our poster down that hung here of Daniel. Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 2, right? We have all these images where we have the Babylonian Empire to be followed by the Mede-Persian, to be followed by who? The Greeks. To be followed by who? Rome. And then the meteorite comes out of heaven, smashes it to smithereens, and grows into a mountain, right? Okay, so remember that imagery because it's so important to the last couple chapters here. We're still dealing with the same thing. What takes place? What we're going to read is Daniel's told there's still 4 kings left in the Mede Empire. The 4th is going to be mightier and more wealthy than any of the rest. And then there's going to be another king that comes about that rises up. Who's that? Who's the next? Babylonian, Mede-Persian. Who's the third? Greek. Now here's what's really interesting. There's some really cool characters in chapter 11. Some characters you're probably familiar with from history, like Alexander. Some real, movies are all about this. Like, how many of you seen the movie The 300? It's in this chapter. It's right here. All these movies and great moments in history, and we're going to read kind of through it kind of flat, but all this really cool stuff takes place. So here's what takes place. There's 4 kings still left in the Mede-Persian Empire, right? And then another one's going to grow up, Alexander the Great. But as soon as he rises up, he falls. Alexander the Great died at the peak he didn't even get to rule. He never established rule over everything he conquered. The kingdoms to his 4 generals. Not to his prosperity, we're going to read in a moment. Guess what? His only son was infantile. In fact, I think he had not yet been born when Alexander dies. And so it's the 4 generals, and there's several years of fighting before they eventually have control, and then they still fight. Here, or the 4 generals won. He gets this great empire. It doesn't go to his heirs whatsoever. With me? Out of these 4 generals, and if you recall back to the imagery from earlier, there were these horns that came out, and then a little horn that grew, and it became greater than the rest. There's going to be 2 of these horns, or these 2 generals, that we are really interested. The Ptolemy is one of the generals. Cleopatra is the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Okay, she's the last of that lineage. It takes us right up to Cleopatra. He is king of the south. Seleucid. There it is. Seleucid is the general of the north. He reigns out of Syria, right? So you see the north and the south. Where are we comparing it to? If we're Daniel, what point on the map makes all the difference? What's the center of the universe? If we're Daniel. It's not Somerville. It's Jerusalem, right? Yeah, it's Jerusalem. Syria's to the north, Egypt's to the south, right? Seleucid is the dynasty, the general who takes care of the north, and that's the king of the north. And what we see is this conflict that takes place between the north and the west, or the north and the south. And then eventually, as they're fighting, there's this other invader, the ships at Chittim. Those are the Romans that come in right towards the end of our reading today. That's the general synopsis, right? You with me so far? Take that outline. I tried to find a video, a good diagram of this. This is the best I have come up with as a visual. I didn't think you'd like that any more than I do, so I just gave up on it and said, well, they're going to have to be confused like me. All right. What I'm going to do is we're just going to draw a couple points of each of these readings. We're going to move relatively quickly and see what we can get through. I have a paraphrase here that I'm going to read along with what we read to give some background to it. We aren't going to get through the end of the chapter today. What's left is going to be for you to dig into as much as you want to dig into. Okay? 1 through 4, Daniel 11. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Just write that off to chapter 10. Right? Now, starting verse 2. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall rise in Persia, and a fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. All right, so the 4 kings, quickly, to me, it's just interesting because of the time that this is being written. Cyrus is the king currently, to be followed by Cambyses, to be followed by Darius, right? You're familiar with Darius. It's Darius. He was seen to be a imposter by many of his day, but he's really important for Bible history because he's the one that upholds Cyrus's decree to build Jerusalem. So he's very involved with that. And then the king that shall be richer than all the rest is Xerxes. And he's the one that it really makes an imprint on history. Although it's interesting, the Hebrew translation of his name I will butcher as well. Ahasuerus. You see him in Ezra and Esther, right? So that's the Hebrew, the same guy, Hebrew interpretation of his name. We just read that he was far richer than the rest, right? Now, history argues how rich he was, but he was very rich. The estimates of the army that he had, I don't think I'm going to read this paraphrase just because we have enough information on the table. The army that he has, he is argued somewhere between 1 million is the absolute lowest and 5 million soldiers. It says that, verse 4 was it? That once he's great, verse 3, let's back up. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. So once he's really strong, he's going to conquer Greece, right? So this is what takes place. He's got somewhere between 1 and 5 million troops. I can't remember the name of the battle, Thomas, or something similar to that. The movie 300's made about it. The details throughout history get skewed, but you can imagine you have 5 million soldiers. We're just going to say 2 that take somewhere in the middle. Your answer to the problem is to throw bodies at it, right? That's how Xerxes wins territory, and he wins a lot of it. Throw bodies at it. The Greeks have a different form. They don't have near the numbers. They rely on strategy and skill, right? And what takes place in history is we find a narrow space where these hundreds of thousands of soldiers can't all fight at the same time, hence the movie 300. And these numbers are, you can find all kind of different numbers, but we're able to be effective with much fewer number versus the many. And so Greece fights off Xerxes. Questions or comments? I gave you more detail than was given in those few verses to fill in some background, but already, I mean, raise your hand if you're not amazed at already what Daniel's told. So I went that way just in case some of you are asleep already. Verse 4 now, and as soon as he is risen, his kingdom shall be broken, right? Alexander the Great is that king that rises, but his kingdom is broken immediately and divided to the four winds. Again, go back into the imagery earlier. The Greek beast had four wings, right? Four horns elsewhere. These imageries are all tying together, but not to his prosperity or not according to his authority. Questions or comments? So the vast majority of the rest of this chapter has to do with the Greek Empire being divided into those four places, and in particular, the Egyptian king, the Ptolemy dynasty, and Seleucus, the one that runs out of Syria. So those generals are the two generals and their lineage that becomes prominent in the rest of the chapter. Okay, verse 5. If I don't break this up right, it will become 5 through 9. Starting in 5. And the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall become great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance. The daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain her strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her and he who supported her in those times. Let's just pause there. There's plenty to deal with there. So the north and the south are constantly fighting with each other. That's, again, Syria and Egypt. And so I think it's the second Ptolemy and maybe the third king from Syria, somewhere right there around that time. They decide, hey, we can't just keep fighting each other and taking territory back and forth. One of the Ptolemies says, you know what, I'm going to give you my daughter in marriage and we'll make an alliance so there's peace. That daughter's name is Bernice. But the king of the north had a problem. It's a minor problem, but it was a problem. He was married. So he says, what do you want me to do with Laodicea? Laodicea. I want to keep making her a church, but she's not. She's a very angry wife soon. What do you want me to do with Laodicea? They say, well, you've got to divorce her. Set her aside. Take the new king. It's going to bring peace. So he does. He divorces her and takes the Ptolemy daughter, who's Bernice. Bernice has a rough go of things because just 2 years after the marriage, the Ptolemy dies. Her father dies down in Egypt. The northern king says, I really liked Laodice better. So now he divorces Bernice and takes back Laodice, which was a mistake on top of mistakes because Laodice was a woman who's not going to be scorned twice. She was going to make sure this never happens again. So just to make sure that he never takes back Bernice, he poisons Bernice. She's dead. Now I'm this far into it, I might as well kill him. Oh wait, and they had an infant son together, dead. And all the people came up with Egypt, the servants, and anything had to do with this woman is going to die. And they did. They're all dead. Now, let me come back and read this verse again. After some years, verse 6, they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm. She did not, did she? And his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, and he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Anyone associated with her is just dead. Now, what's going to take place is we get ready to get into verse 7, is her brother, Bernice's brother, takes offense to it. He comes up, we're already just about out of time, so he comes up from Egypt and prevails for a short while against Syria. He can't conquer them. What's he doing? He's avenging his sister. But here's what's great. And there's a subtle message I want to get out, because it's really, really important. The king of the south comes up, he prevails for a while, but he can't prevail forever. He avenges his wife by making, or his sister, by making a lot of people die. Now he's being chased back down to the south. What does he take with him? Their gods. Now think about that. We worry about our kids being kidnapped. It's possible our spouse could be kidnapped. But who wants to serve a God that can be kidnapped? It's an important message. And it's really, really, I think, riding over this whole concept. Our God can't be kidnapped. In fact, he's the one looking over all this, using all this to bring about a baby. Just going to conquer the world. That's our God. We are out of time. All right, I hope I gave you... Let me see a quick raise of hands. Continue with chapter 11 in the history or move on. Raise your hand if you want to continue chapter 11. It carries, okay. We will continue then next week. I lied earlier. Thank you.